For 2 years, every single morning, this elephant stood in the exact same place beside a sanctuary fence, facing the road that led inside. He didn't follow the herd. He didn't search for food. Rain or heat, he never left. Each time a vehicle passed, he rose with sudden hope, only to collapse again in silence. People thought it was a habit, but the truth was far more painful. This elephant wasn't lost. He was waiting, and what he was waiting for nearly broke his heart. Dawn slid over the Louisiana bayou like a slow breath, turning the mist silver above the cypress knees. At Bayou Haven, Elephant Sanctuary, mornings usually stayed quiet. Boots on gravel, a kettle whistling in the staff cabin, until the front fence drew every glance. Buddy was already there, planted near the entrance road, as if the day belonged to him first. He was a young Asian elephant, 9 years old by the sanctuary's best estimate, with a domed forehead and smaller ears that fanned like soft shields. His tusks were only pale nubs, but his trunk could curl a fallen branch like rope. This morning it hung low, beaded with dew, while his feet pressed into the crater he'd worn into the clay, as if he belonged there. The staff called it the waiting place. They'd joked about it at first, the way people joke when something unsettles them. But the joke died the longer it lasted. For 2 years, Buddy had walked here at sunrise and held his post. He didn't drift to the mud wallows or shade trees. He faced the road, steady as a promise, listening for what never arrived. 2 years earlier, he'd come in on a flatbed trailer from a busted roadside attraction outside Baton Rouge, thin, scraped, and strangely gentle. Most elephants with that kind of past flinched from hands and sudden sounds. Buddy didn't flinch. He watched. He accepted water, let the vet check his mouth without a fight, and stared past everyone as if he was tracking a figure they couldn't see. Ranger Hank Miller, 63 and sun-leathered, had started timing Buddy's mornings the way old men time storms. Hank had seen gators and hurricanes, and men lie to themselves, but he hadn't seen an animal keep an appointment with heartbreak. Some days, he'd stand beside Buddy and talk like it mattered, just to hear a human voice in that quiet vigil. Around Buddy, the bayou kept moving. Egrets stepped through the shallows. Frogs stitched the air with low percussion. A barge horn moaned somewhere downriver, and the scent of damp earth rose with the heat. Inside the sanctuary, the other elephants rumbled softly and dragged hay, their bodies loosening into safety. Buddy stayed apart, close enough to hear them, too far to belong. Some mornings he paced 3 steps along the fence, then 3 back, tracing the same path like a prayer he couldn't finish. He would stop, square his shoulders to the road, and lift his trunk high as if tasting the wind for a name. When nothing answered, his muscles locked again. Even the flies seemed to hesitate before landing on him, as if respecting the stillness. Hank tried small kindnesses that felt too simple for a problem this big. He brought fresh sugarcane, sweet and sharp, and laid it like an offering near Buddy's feet. He dragged an old tire swing to the fence line, hoping play would loosen that ache. A young caretaker named Rosa clipped a blue ribbon to the wire. Superstition more than science. Buddy touched it once, then looked away. By late morning, the first vehicles would pass. Delivery trucks, volunteer vans, sometimes a sheriff's cruiser cutting through the service road. That was when Buddy changed. His ears snapped forward, wide and tense. His head lifted with startling speed for an animal that massive. The air around him felt charged, like the second before thunder breaks, and everyone nearby held their breath. One day, a rusted pickup slowed near the gate, coughing black smoke and rattling like it might fall apart. Buddy surged so suddenly, Hank's throat tightened. The elephant pressed toward the chain link, trunk reaching through the squares as far as it could go, searching the cab, the bed, the shadow under the chassis, anywhere a familiar scent might hide. His breath came loud, urgent, almost human. The driver waved, distracted, and rolled on without stopping. The pickup's tailgate clapped away down the road, the sound shrinking into nothing. Buddy's body deflated in plain view, shoulders sinking, ears drooping, trunk folding back against his chest like an arm protecting a wound. He didn't rage. He didn't trumpet. He simply lowered his head, as if the world had confirmed what he feared. Buddy eased down to his knees, not collapsing, but choosing the ground the way someone chooses silence. Hank stood beside him, with his keys in his hand, helpless and suddenly angry at every rule that said animals didn't feel this deeply. He raised his radio and called Dr. Claire Bennett, voice rough. "He's doing it again," he said, "like he thinks someone's coming back, like he can't miss it." When the sun slid west and the road finally went quiet, Buddy shifted as if waking from a long strain. He tore a clump of grass with a slow pull, chewed without hunger, and exhaled a long, shuddering breath. The sanctuary lights blinked on one by one, soft halos against the swamp dark. Buddy stayed at the waiting place until the last glow faded, guarding the empty road like it held his whole life. Morning returned the same way it always did, quiet, humid, and patient. A thin fog hovered over the bayou water beyond the fence, and the cypress trees held still as if they were listening too. Buddy was already at the waiting place, facing the entrance road with the kind of focus that made the air feel heavier. His skin looked dusty in the early light, creases holding yesterday's mud like old memories. He shifted his weight once, then settled again, feet planted in the shallow bowl he'd pressed into the clay over hundreds of mornings. A breeze moved through the grass, and Buddy lifted his trunk, slow and careful, tasting scents the way others might read letters. Inside the sanctuary, breakfast sounds carried across the yard. Hay being tossed, water troughs filling, a soft rumble from the herd as they greeted the day. Buddy listened, but he didn't answer. He kept his shoulders angled toward the road, ears relaxed, but ready, as if the smallest change in sound could turn the world back on. Ranger Hank watched from the gatehouse with a paper cup of coffee cooling in his hands. He'd started keeping notes in a pocket notebook, not like a scientist, but like a man trying to prove to himself he wasn't imagining it. Same spot, same posture, same hour. Hank underlined one line twice. He stands like he's waiting for a person. Around mid-morning, Dr. Claire Bennett pulled up in her white SUV, tires whispering over gravel. She was new enough to still see the sanctuary with fresh eyes, but seasoned enough to recognize suffering when it hid behind calm. She didn't rush to Buddy. She stopped 20 yards away and simply watched the way his body held tension like a rope pulled too tight. Claire noticed details others had started to ignore. Buddy's gaze wasn't wandering. It was aimed, steady, almost searching. His trunk wasn't hanging loose. It hovered, testing, ready to reach. When a dragonfly landed on his cheek, he didn't flick it away. That stillness wasn't peace. It was restraint, as if moving would risk missing something he couldn't afford to miss. The first vehicle of the day came later than usual. A delivery van with bright paint and a clean engine. Buddy rose, but only halfway. His ears moved forward, then stopped, uncertain. The van rolled past without slowing, and Buddy sat again with a quiet acceptance that stung more than anger. Claire wrote down one word: selective. Then, just before noon, an old feed truck appeared at the far bend in the road. It rattled like loose bones, exhaust drifting behind it in a gray ribbon. Buddy snapped fully upright. His ears flared wide, and his trunk lifted high, pulling the air in deep. The change was so sharp it startled the other elephants into silence, their rumbles fading as they watched. Buddy took 3 urgent steps to the fence, pressing his forehead near the wire. His trunk slid through the squares, reaching, searching, trembling at the tip like a finger trying to touch a face in the dark. His breathing grew loud, almost ragged, and for a moment his whole body leaned forward as if love itself had weight and could pull him through metal. The truck didn't stop. It never even slowed. It clattered by, the driver unaware of the storm he'd just walked past. The sound of the engine faded, and Buddy's posture collapsed in slow pieces, ears drooping, head lowering, trunk withdrawing like a hand pulled back from a hot stove. He sank down again, careful, deliberate, and the quiet afterward felt cruel. Hank swore under his breath, then went silent, ashamed of the word. Claire's throat tightened. She had seen elephants grieve before, seen them stand over bones with gentle attention, but this was different. This was hope being rehearsed and broken, over and over, until it became a wound that wouldn't close. She watched Buddy's eyes go distant, like a light dimming behind glass. That afternoon, Claire walked the fence line and found the ground under Buddy's feet packed hard as stone. His constant standing had carved a shallow basin, a small crater of loyalty. Near the post, a faded strip of blue ribbon still fluttered from Rosa's earlier attempt at comfort. Buddy touched it once with the side of his trunk, then let it go, as if softness didn't make sense anymore. In the clinic, Claire told Hank what he already feared. Buddy wasn't just stuck. He was wearing himself down from the inside. His body could survive. Scars and old bruises, but not this daily crash of anticipation. Hank asked the question that hung between them like smoke. What if he's waiting for someone who's never coming? As dusk cooled the yard, Buddy remained at the waiting place, but his waiting changed shape. It wasn't just watchful now. It was tired. Claire stood at the edge of the gravel and promised herself she wouldn't treat this like a behavior problem. Somewhere in Buddy's past was a name, a smell, a sound, a goodbye that never finished. And until she found it, the road would keep breaking him, one passing truck at a time. The heat settled heavier over the sanctuary in the days that followed, pressing down like a hand that wouldn't lift. Buddy stayed near the fence longer now, even after the road went quiet. His breathing grew shallow when he stood, and when he sat, it took him longer to rise again. The waiting place was no longer just familiar ground. It was taking something from him. Claire began her mornings with Buddy before she checked any charts. She watched the way his skin folded along his ribs, how small cracks formed where movement should have healed them. His eyes, once alert and curious, carried a dull distance that worried her more than the numbers on her clipboard. Elephants could endure pain. What they struggled with was despair. The herd noticed too. From across the yard, low rumbles drifted toward Buddy like invitations. One younger female approached the fence and reached out, brushing his flank with her trunk. Buddy acknowledged her with a soft touch, then turned back to the road. The message was clear. He wasn't rejecting them. He was occupied by something older and heavier. Claire ordered changes that made sense on paper. Feeding stations were moved closer to the water. Enrichment toys were placed along Buddy's usual path to tempt him away. For a few hours, he followed. He nudged a hanging tire, tore bark from a cypress log, even splashed mud across his shoulders. Then, as if remembering something urgent, he returned to the fence. At the end of the week, Buddy refused breakfast. Not completely, just enough to worry anyone who knew elephants. He took a few mouthfuls, chewed slowly, and let the rest fall from his trunk. Claire noted the drop in intake, the subtle sag in his posture, the way his weight shifted unevenly. These weren't dramatic signs. They were quiet ones, the kind that arrived before real trouble. She called a meeting in the small office near the clinic. Charts were spread across the table, pages filled with careful handwriting and circled dates. Claire spoke plainly. Buddy's immune system was weakening. His skin infections weren't healing. His heart rate spiked whenever vehicles passed. "This isn't stubbornness," she said. "It's grief under strain." Director Vaughn listened with his arms crossed, expression tight. He'd run Bayou Haven for 15 years and had seen compassion turn reckless more than once. "We can't turn this place into a reunion center," he said. "Whatever happened before he came here, we don't reopen it. Human attachment is what breaks elephants in the first place." Hank felt the words land hard. He'd heard them before, had even agreed with them once, but standing beside Buddy every morning changed things. "What if that's not true this time?" he asked quietly. Vaughn didn't answer right away. Silence filled the room, thick with rules and fear of being wrong. Back at the fence, Claire tried something gentler. She sat on the gravel where Buddy could see her and spoke in a low, steady voice, not expecting understanding, only presence. Buddy watched her without moving. When a distant engine hummed, his ears lifted, tension rippling through his shoulders. Claire stayed still. She didn't follow his gaze. She let the moment pass. By afternoon, the sun had burned the fog away, leaving the yard sharp and bright. Buddy stood, swayed slightly, and steadied himself against the fence post. The metal rang softly. Hank noticed how Buddy leaned more often now, how standing took effort. The waiting place was no longer neutral ground. It was wearing him thin, day by day. That evening, Claire reviewed the footage from the gate camera. She watched Buddy's reactions, frame by frame, marking differences she'd missed before. Clean engines barely moved him. New tires meant nothing. It was the older vehicles, the rattles, the smells, that pulled him upright. The pattern wasn't random. It was precise, like memory itself. As night fell, Buddy finally stepped away from the fence, just a few paces, and paused. He looked back once, long and searching, then settled near the trees where the shadows were softer. Claire took that as a small mercy, not a victory. Whatever Buddy was waiting for had already cost him too much. And if nothing changed soon, waiting might be the thing that finished him. Rules arrived at Bayou Haven the way storms did, sudden, heavy, and hard to argue with. Director Vaughn posted a memo by the clinic door reminding staff of protocol: no contact with past handlers, no exceptions. Buddy's case, it said, required consistency, not sentiment. The paper fluttered in the humid air, pale and firm, like an answer meant to end a conversation. Buddy never read memos. He read the road. The next morning he returned to the waiting place with the same quiet resolve, shoulders squared, feet finding the bowl in the clay, as if guided. He faced the bend where engines first appeared, trunk hovering in a careful arc. When nothing came, he held the posture anyway, conserving hope like a resource he couldn't replace. Hank watched from the gatehouse, jaw set. He had followed rules his whole career. Wildlife demanded order, and order kept people and animals alive. But the longer he stood beside Buddy, the less the rules explained. The elephant's attention wasn't scattered. It was disciplined. He wasn't restless. He was listening for something exact. Claire tried to talk Vaughn through the evidence. She brought video clips, timestamps, a grid of reactions that showed clear preference. Older engines, specific exhaust notes, certain hours of the day. Vaughn nodded, unimpressed. "Patterns don't change policy," he said. "We don't chase ghosts." The word lingered, sharp as a rebuke. That afternoon, a volunteer tuned the radio in the maintenance shed, letting an old country station bleed into the yard. A high, clean whistle cut through the static during a song's intro. Buddy froze. His ears lifted, slow and deliberate, and his trunk drew a tight spiral before settling. The moment passed, but Claire had seen it. Something small had struck deep. She asked Hank about the sound. He shrugged, then tried it himself. A simple, breathy whistle he'd used to call dogs as a boy. Buddy's eyes flicked toward him. Not fully awake, but not empty either. The response was subtle, almost private, and that made it louder than any trumpet. Claire felt the shape of a door, barely ajar. Vaughn shut it again. "We're not training him," he said when Claire brought it up. "We're protecting him." He reminded her of the lawsuits, the headlines, the way good intentions could turn ugly. Claire heard the fear beneath his certainty. She also heard Buddy's breath quicken whenever a truck growled in the distance. By week's end, Buddy's weight dipped again. The scale didn't lie. His skin infections spread along the folds where movement should have healed them. Claire adjusted treatment, added supplements, changed bandaging schedules. The science moved. Buddy didn't. He stood and waited, saving his strength for the road. Hank found something in the storage shed while looking for spare chain, an old box labeled Intake, MISC. Inside were collars, tags, and paperwork too worn to sort. At the bottom lay a cracked leather band, rusted buckle stiff with age. Faint letters pressed into the hide caught the light. A date. 2 years back. Claire held the band like a fragile truth. It wasn't sanctuary issue. It wasn't new. It smelled faintly of oil and hay. She pictured Buddy as he'd arrived, calm, watchful, unafraid, and felt the pieces shift. This wasn't a bond formed here. It had been carried in, stitched to memory. That evening, Buddy startled at a distant engine and rose too fast. He wobbled, caught himself on the fence, metal ringing low. Hank stepped forward, heart thudding, but Buddy steadied and lifted his trunk again, stubborn as faith. When the sound faded, he lowered himself with care, as if the ground might disappear. Night fell soft and thick. Claire stood at the edge of the yard, the leather band warm in her palm, and listened to the frogs stitch the dark. Rules could keep a place running. They couldn't explain a heart that waited with this precision. Somewhere beyond the bend, a sound, a smell, a goodbye, unfinished, had written itself into Buddy. And Rules, she realized, had no language for that. The box with the cracked leather band changed the temperature of Claire's thoughts. She carried it back to the clinic and laid it on the steel table as if it might bruise. The letters were faint, the date incomplete, but the smell of oil and cut hay lingered. Buddy watched from the fence line, calm and distant, as though he sensed something old had surfaced. Claire pulled intake logs from the archive room, a narrow space that hummed with a tired fan. Pages rustled, dates blurred, signatures repeated. Buddy's file stopped abruptly, a clean edge where stories usually frayed. There were notes about transport and care, then a gap that felt intentional. Missing pages don't announce themselves. They simply refuse to be found. She asked Rosa to help, and together they traced shipment numbers and gate entries. A discrepancy appeared the way stars do at dusk, subtle, undeniable. Buddy hadn't arrived alone. There was a hold time not explained, a delay measured in weeks. Claire felt the logic tighten. You don't delay an elephant unless something else is happening. They found Eli Price, a former intake clerk who now fixed pumps by the river. His hands shook when he spoke, not with age but memory. He remembered Buddy because Buddy hadn't fought. He leaned into people, Eli said, like he knew the rules already. Eli mentioned a pickup, old and loud, parked by the service road longer than allowed. Claire showed him the leather band. Eli nodded once. That came off a collar, he said, not ours. He described a man with oil-stained sleeves and a kid who whistled to keep the elephant calm. No names, just details that clung. The smell of diesel, the way the kid sang when Buddy swayed at night. Back at the fence, Claire tested the theory with care. She recorded engine sounds from different vehicles and played them softly from her phone, low enough to be a question. Buddy ignored the new trucks. At the rasp of an older engine, his ears lifted. At a clean whistle, his trunk curled tight, a muscle remembering its work. The middle of the day pressed in, heat thick as syrup. Buddy rose when a distant rattle approached and pressed to the wire. Breath loud, eyes bright with something close to relief. The vehicle passed. The brightness fell away. Claire felt it hit her like a wave. This wasn't random hope. It was recognition, missing its answer. She followed the date on the band to county records, then to a fairground report marked Incident. An elephant injured, a temporary caregiver. Transport arranged. The name surfaced slowly, then all at once. Jake Carter. The words landed with weight, not certainty, but direction. Claire wrote them twice to be sure they stayed. Hank listened without interrupting, the way he listened to storms before they broke. He remembered the whistle, the way Buddy's posture softened for half a breath. If there's a person, Hank said, then there's a road that leads back. Claire nodded. Roads were what Buddy understood best. That afternoon, Vaughn called her in. He had heard about the questions, the recordings, the visit to Eli. This ends here, he said, tired more than angry. We don't reopen old doors. Claire looked past him to the yard where Buddy stood, faithful to a line in the dirt. The door's already open, she said quietly. He's been holding it. As the sun tipped west, Claire sat near the fence again. Buddy approached, not close, but closer than before. She didn't speak. She let the leather band rest on the gravel between them. Buddy touched it with the side of his trunk, just once, then stilled. The moment passed without spectacle. heavy with meaning. Evening cooled the bayou, frogs rising into chorus. Claire packed her notes with care and resolve. A name had surfaced, a sound had been identified, a waiting had found its shape. Buddy returned to the waiting place as the light faded, but the air felt altered, as if the road itself had begun to remember the way back. Claire drove west through the afternoon heat, the bayou thinning into long stretches of road that hummed beneath her tires. The name Jake Carter sat on the dashboard in block letters, weighted like a promise. She replayed Buddy's reactions in her mind, the engine rasp, the whistle's lift, and felt the map tightening around a single point. Jake's shop stood behind a feed store outside a small Texas town, tin roof rattling in the wind. The smell of oil and cut grass met her before he did. When he stepped out, wiping his hands on a rag, his eyes moved past Claire to her car, searching for something else. She spoke Buddy's name. Jake closed his eyes. He didn't argue. He didn't ask why now. He sat on an overturned bucket and stared at the dirt like it might explain the last 2 years. "They told me not to come back," he said, voice steady, hurt contained. Said it would confuse him. Said leaving clean was kinder. Inside the shop, photographs were taped to a cabinet door. An elephant calf beside a battered pickup, a girl's braid over one shoulder, a hand resting on a broad gray forehead. Emily appeared in the doorway, taller now, cautious. When she heard Buddy's name, she nodded once, like she'd been holding it. Claire showed them the video. Buddy at the fence. Buddy lifting to the sound of an engine. Buddy folding back into himself when the road betrayed him. Emily pressed her palms to her mouth, then dropped them, breathing hard. "He's still waiting," she said. Not a question. A fact that hurt to touch. Jake talked about the nights at the fairground, how Buddy leaned into the truck's shadow, how Emily whistled when storms rolled in, how the engine's idle kept the dark away. He talked about the goodbye, quick and official, the promise that Buddy would be safer somewhere else. He didn't talk about the drive home. Back at Bayou Haven, the road kept teaching Buddy its lesson. An old farm truck slowed near the gate, and Buddy surged, muscles bright with hope. When it passed, his knees bent, and he sat with care, the way you sit when standing costs too much. Hank turned away. Claire felt time thinning. Vaughn's answer came by phone, and it was final. No visit, no exceptions. Claire listened, thanked him, and hung up with a calm that surprised her. She watched Buddy brace against the fence and understood the cost of waiting another week. Rules were meant to prevent harm. Today, they were causing it. Jake stood at the edge of the sanctuary fence after dark, hat in his hands, truck idling low. Emily stayed close, quiet as a held breath. They hadn't crossed a line yet. Claire stood between law and need, heart loud in her ears. "If we do this," she said, "we do it once." The morning they returned, Buddy rose before anyone spoke. His ears lifted, wide and sure, and his trunk climbed the air like it knew the route. The pickup's rattle reached him from the bend, and he answered with a sound that broke the yard open, a trumpet, bright and unafraid. Emily whistled the old tune, the one she'd kept, like a secret. Buddy pressed to the wire, trunk threading through, searching until it found her shoulder. He breathed there, slow and deep, and something in his frame finally let go. The fence held. The waiting didn't. After, Buddy stood still, not frozen, but resting. He took hay from Hank's hands and chewed with purpose. The road lay quiet, no longer an ache. Claire watched the light soften over the bayou and knew the hardest part had passed. Waiting had found its answer. The yard felt altered after the reunion, as if the air had learned a new arrangement. Buddy remained near the fence, but his stance had softened. He shifted his weight without bracing, ears relaxed instead of locked. When a breeze crossed the bayou, he lifted his trunk to meet it, not searching now, just breathing. Word spread quickly through the sanctuary. Staff gathered at a careful distance, unsure whether to celebrate or worry. Director Vaughn arrived with a tight jaw and a folder under his arm, eyes moving from Buddy to the pickup and back again. The rules hadn't changed, But something else had. Something visible in Buddy's posture. Claire stood between them and waited for the anger. It came, measured and controlled. Vaughn spoke of liability, of precedent, of lines that once crossed were hard to redraw. Claire listened, then pointed without drama to Buddy's flank, where the skin looked less inflamed, the breathing steadier. "Look at him," she said. "This is treatment." Buddy interrupted with a low rumble that traveled through the fence like a held note. The herd answered from across the yard, curious and alert. A matriarch stepped closer, testing the space, reading the room the way elephants do best. Buddy turned toward her, not away from the fence, and rumbled back. An introduction delayed, not denied. Jake stayed quiet, hat in his hands, eyes wet but steady. Emily watched Buddy with a careful joy, as if loud happiness might break something fragile. She hummed instead of whistling, letting the tune drift. Buddy swayed once, then steadied, trunk resting against the wire, present in a way he hadn't been in years. The afternoon brought a test. A delivery truck rolled in, new and clean, engine smooth. Buddy noticed it, then let it pass. No surge, no collapse. The yard exhaled. Hank felt it in his chest and laughed once, surprised by the sound. "He knows," he said softly. "He knows who he was waiting for." Vaughn watched the scale readings with a frown that eased into thought. Numbers don't argue the way feelings do. Appetite returned in small, decisive bites. Water disappeared from the trough at a healthy pace. When Buddy stepped away from the fence to accept hay from another elephant, the moment carried a quiet weight. Claire proposed a plan that afternoon, careful and contained. Short, supervised visits, clear boundaries, documentation for every change. Not a reunion center, but a bridge. Vaughn listened longer this time. The folder stayed closed. Outside, Buddy shifted toward the trees with the matriarch, then looked back once, checking the fence like a habit he was learning to loosen. As evening cooled the bayou, Buddy lay down on his side, something he hadn't done near the road in months. He slept with one eye half open, trunk curled near his mouth, the posture of an animal finally safe enough to rest. Emily watched from the gate, tears quiet and unashamed. Night brought its chorus, frogs, insects, the river breathing. Claire wrote until her pen ached, noting changes that mattered because they were small, reduced pacing, balanced weight, responsive rumbling. Healing doesn't announce itself. It arrives in increments you have to be willing to count. The next morning, Buddy didn't rush the waiting place. He went there, stood a moment, then turned toward the herd without a sound. The fence held its place. The road kept its distance. For the first time, the choice belonged to him. By dusk, the sanctuary felt wider, not because it had grown, but because something inside it had released. Vaughn signed a provisional order with a steady hand. Hank pinned a small ribbon to the post and smiled at the ground. Buddy lifted his trunk to the fading light and breathed, not in hope, but in peace. The sanctuary learned a new rhythm in the weeks that followed, one built on patience instead of urgency. Buddy's days no longer hinged on the bend in the road. He still visited the fence, but briefly, like someone checking the weather before choosing where to walk. The waiting place remained, yet it no longer owned him. Morning light found Buddy among the herd more often now. He moved with them toward water, shoulder to shoulder, learning the small negotiations of shared space. When he paused, it was to listen to a rumble or answer one, not to scan for engines. The ground under the fence began to soften, rain filling the shallow bowl he'd carved with hope. The visits were scheduled and spare, exactly as promised. Jake and Emily arrived once a month, parked beyond the gate, voices low. They didn't rush the fence or call Buddy's name too loud. They waited. Buddy recognized the sounds without strain now, greeting them with a calm trumpet that lifted and settled like a wave. Emily sang less to soothe and more to celebrate. Her tune carried across the yard, and Buddy swayed with an ease that surprised the watchers. Sometimes another elephant joined, a curious echo of the melody in rumble and step. The fence stayed between worlds, but the space around it felt shared. Claire watched the data change in ways that made the work feel honest again. Weight returned steadily. Skin healed where it had split. Heart rates spiked less often, then rarely. The notes in her ledger grew shorter, less urgent. Healing, she learned, didn't need adjectives once it took hold. Director Vaughn kept his distance at first, then closer. He read reports twice, asked quieter questions, listened longer. The provisional order became a standing protocol, careful and humane. The sanctuary didn't loosen its standards. It refined them. Rules learned to bend without breaking. Hank retired that spring. On his last morning, he stood with Buddy at the fence and said goodbye like men do, without ceremony. Buddy touched Hank's shoulder with the side of his trunk, gentle as punctuation. Hank laughed through it and left his old notebook in the gatehouse drawer, full of times and truths. By summer, the waiting place held a small sign, simple and hand-painted. Visitors paused there, reading, without being told what to feel. Buddy passed it on his way to shade, trunk brushing the post as if acknowledging a chapter finished. He didn't stop anymore. He had places to be. One afternoon, a line of trucks rolled by. New, old, loud, clean. Buddy noticed and kept walking. The herd gathered beneath the trees, dust rising around their legs. The road did what roads do, carrying people past moments they would never know they missed. At dusk, Emily pressed her palm to the fence and whispered thanks into the cooling air. Buddy answered with a low rumble that felt like closure rather than promise. The bayou breathed around them, frogs tuning the dark, stars arriving one by one. Later, Buddy lay down with the herd, fully on his side, trunk slack, sleep unguarded. The fence was quiet. The road slept too. In the place where he had waited for 2 years, grass began to grow back, thin and green. Love had not erased what was lost. It had answered it. And in answering, it taught the sanctuary something durable and plain. Waiting ends when belonging begins, and hearts, human or otherwise, heal best when they are allowed to remember and to stay. If this story touched your heart, let us know in the simplest way. Comment 1 if you believe animals remember love. Comment 0 if you think waiting like this takes more strength than we understand. And if Buddy's story stayed with you, please subscribe to the channel. We share real stories about loyalty, loss, and hope. Stories that remind us what it means to care. Your comment helps this story reach others who need it today. And your subscription makes sure you don't miss the next one. Thank you for watching.